The Galactic Concordance had ruled the stars for over 300 cycles. Its fleet stretched from the burning nebulae of the Eastern Rim to the frozen voids beyond the shattered belt. Every species they encountered either joined willingly or was brought into line. There had been no true resistance in generations. The Concordance believed itself unshakable, its technology unmatched, its authority absolute. So when their long-range sensors picked up strange energy pulses from a quiet star system on the edge of uncharted space, Sool, as the old star charts called it, they sent a standard exploration fleet. Not a war armada, but a show of presence. 37 vessels led by the pride of the Zenthari Dominion, the command cruiser Iron Resolve. At its helm was Fleet Commander Virek, a veteran of 17 pacification campaigns. He expected to find a primitive world, perhaps just entering its atomic age, unaware of the greater galaxy. What he found was silence. The Sol system had no orbital defenses, no shipyards, no fleet waiting in the dark. Earth hung in the void like a blue-green jewel, wrapped in clouds and calm. Cities glowed softly at night, but there were no weapon signatures, no energy spikes, no signs of panic. It was as if the humans didn't even know they were being watched. Virek ordered a standard first contact protocol. Hail on all frequencies, broadcast peaceful intent in every known linguistic route. Offer data packets explaining the Concordance's benevolent governance. For 6 full cycles they transmitted. No reply came. Then on the 7th cycle a signal broke through. It was not encrypted, not disguised. Just a single audio channel, clean and clear, originating from a small unmarked platform in high orbit. No bigger than a freighter with no visible weapons or engines. The voice belonged to a human male. His name was never given. Later records would simply call him Daniel. He spoke only once. You invaded our home, that was all. The words were calm, not angry, not fearful, just final. Before Virek could respond, before his comms officer could even log the transmission properly, every ship in the fleet went dark, not from an explosion, not from a beam or missile. Their systems simply stopped. Navigation failed. Life support stuttered. Artificial gravity flickered out. Even the emergency backups, designed to function during total core collapse, refused to activate. It was as if the ships had forgotten how to be ships. On the Iron Resolve, alarms died mid-wail. Screens went black. The hum of the reactor faded into silence. Virek grabbed the edge of his command chair, weightless now, heart-pounding. Outside the viewport, the other vessels drifted like dead fish in an endless sea. Then, just as suddenly, everything returned. Lights flickered on. Gravity re-engaged with a soft thud. Systems rebooted, but something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Every data core in the fleet had been rewritten. Not erased, rewritten. Personal logs, tactical archives, even private messages between crew members. All replaced with a single line of text, repeating endlessly, "You invaded our home." Worse, the neural implants worn by every officer, standard issue for Concordance command staff, began emitting low-frequency pulses. Crew members screamed, clutching their heads. Some collapsed. Others stared blankly into space, whispering the same phrase over and over. Virek ordered an immediate retreat. No one argued. The fleet turned as one, engines flaring, fleeing the Sol system as if chased by ghosts. But the damage was done. Back on the bridge, Virek reviewed the sensor logs. There had been no weapons fire. No energy discharge from Earth, no drone launch, nothing. It was as if the humans had reached into the fairy code of the Concordance's technology and flipped a switch no one knew existed. He tried to contact High Command. The message went through, but when it arrived at Orithos, the capital world, it carried the same phrase embedded in its metadata. Within hours, the phrase began appearing in unrelated transmissions across 3 sectors. The humans had not attacked. They had infected, and they had done it with 6 words. Days later, the fleet limped into neutral space. Engineers worked around the clock to purge the anomaly. They replaced cores, rewrote firmware, even melted down neural implants. But the phrase kept returning. Sometimes in maintenance logs, sometimes in dreams. Once, a junior technician woke up screaming it in a language he didn't know. Virek requested a debriefing with the science directorate. He described the orbital platform, small, smooth, no markings, no response to scans. It simply watched them. And when they crossed an invisible line, it spoke. The directorate dismissed his report at first. Primitive species cannot manipulate quantum-level firmware, they said. This is mass hysteria. Stress-induced hallucination. But then another fleet sent to investigate a nearby system reported the same thing. Not from humans, from a data packet that had hitched a ride on a refugee ship fleeing Sol. The phrase had spread like a virus. Back on Earth, life continued as if nothing had happened. Children went to school. Farmers tended fields. Satellites tracked weather. No celebrations. No warnings. Just quiet normalcy. No one on Earth sent another message. No demands. No threats. No explanation. They had said what needed to be said, and the galaxy, for the first time in centuries, felt afraid. The Concordants had always believed it was the apex of civilization, that all lesser species would eventually bow or break, but humanity had done neither. They had not bowed. They had not broken. They had simply drawn a line and erased anyone who crossed it without ever raising a weapon. Fleet Commander Virek never returned to active duty. He spent his remaining years in a quiet retreat on the moon of Lyra 9, staring at the stars. He never spoke of Sol again, but sometimes in the dead of night, he would whisper those 6 words to himself as if testing whether they still held power. They did. Across the Empire, rumors spread. Some said the humans were ancient beings who had hidden for millennia. Others claimed they were not biological at all, but something older, guardians of a forgotten law. A few even suggested Earth was not a planet but a trap. None of it mattered. What mattered was this. The Concordants had entered a system without permission. They had assumed dominance, and in return they had been shown in the clearest possible terms that they were not welcome. The humans had spoken only once, and the galaxy had not slept since. News of the Sol incident spread faster than any Concordance courier could contain it. At first, it was just whispers among dockworkers on fringe worlds, tales of a ghost fleet returning with empty eyes and broken machines. But when the phrase "you invaded our home" began appearing in public data streams, in medical logs, even in children's learning tablets, the whispers turned to panic. The High Council on Orithos tried to silence the rumors. They declared the Sol event a contained anomaly and ordered all returning crew members quarantined. But containment failed. The signal was not just data, it was adaptive. It learned, it hid, it waited. On the mining colony of Kesar 7, a young linguist named Mara Hayes worked in the archives department, translating old trade records from dead languages. She wasn't part of the military. She wasn't even important in the grand scheme of the Concordance. But she had a gift. She heard patterns others missed. When the first corrupted transmission reached Kesar 7, most engineers scrubbed it and moved on. Mara didn't. She listened to the raw audio file, the human voice calm and clear. She slowed it down. She filtered the background noise. And deep beneath the surface, she found it. A second layer. Not sound but vibration. Subharmonic frequencies pulsing at a rate that matched neural resonance in most concordant species. It wasn't just a message. It was a key. She ran tests in secret using an old neural simulator meant for language immersion. When she played the full transmission through it, the machine didn't crash, it rewrote its own core programming. The screen blinked once, then displayed the same 6 words in every language the simulator knew. Mara reported her findings to her supervisor. He laughed. "You're saying a sentence rewrote a machine?" But that night he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the voice in his dreams. By morning he reported her to security. Before they could arrest her, Mara fled. She boarded a cargo hauler bound for the neutral trade hub of Vexus, carrying only a data chip with her research and a small bag of clothes. She didn't know who to trust. But she knew one thing. The humans hadn't attacked. They had warned, and the Concordants hadn't listened. Meanwhile, on Orithos, High Chancellor Lorne faced growing unrest. Planetary governors demanded answers. Military leaders argued over whether to send another fleet or declare Sol forbidden space. Religious sects claimed the humans were divine judges sent to punish imperial pride. The unity of the Concordance, the very thing that had held thousands of species together for centuries, was cracking. Lorne ordered a full quarantine of the Sol system. No ships in, no signals out. He even authorized the deployment of signal dampeners, massive satellites designed to block all transmissions within a light-year radius. But by the time the dampeners were launched, it was too late. The phrase had already escaped. Refugee ships fleeing economic collapse near the Sol border carried corrupted nav computers. Merchant vessels trading in rare minerals unknowingly downloaded infected updates from public data hubs. Even diplomatic envoys returning from neutral systems found their secure channels repeating the phrase in their sleep logs. It wasn't hacking. It wasn't sabotage. It was something deeper, like the universe itself had remembered those words and refused to forget them. On the industrial moon of Vexus, a man named Leo Carter worked in a fusion plant, maintaining coolant lines for reactors that powered half the sector. He was human, but not from Earth. His ancestors had left Sol centuries ago during a forgotten exodus, lost to time and war. His people had scattered, forgotten their origins, blended into the galaxy. But they kept stories. Stories of a blue world, of silence before storm, of a people who spoke once and meant it forever. When Leo heard the phrase on a public broadcast, spoken by a malfunctioning service drone, he froze. His grandmother had whispered those exact words to him as a child, during a bedtime tale about the old home. He thought it was just a fable. Now he wasn't so sure. He dug through family archives stored on a rusted data drive. Buried in encrypted logs was a star map, one that matched Sol's coordinates. And a warning: if they come in force, do not fight. Let them hear the truth. Then let them go. Leo tried to contact local authorities, hoping to explain that humanity wasn't a threat. They were a boundary. But before he could reach anyone, his apartment's security system locked him inside. His comms went silent. A message flashed on his wall screen. You are flagged for cognitive contamination. He barely escaped through a maintenance tunnel, vanishing into Vexus's undercity, a maze of pipes, forgotten factories, and outcasts. There he met others like him, not just humans, but former Concordant citizens who had seen too much, heard too much, and could no longer pretend everything was fine. They called themselves the Listeners. They didn't fight. They watched. They recorded every new appearance of the phrase. They mapped its spread like a disease, but one that cured arrogance instead of killing bodies. One night, a woman with silver eyes and a voice like wind through steel found Leo in a scrapyard. She handed him a small device, a neural shunt, clean, unmarked. Earth didn't send a weapon, she said. They sent a mirror. The Concordants looked into it and saw its own greed. That's what broke them. Leo asked who she was. She only smiled. Someone who remembers home. Back on Arethos, High Chancellor Lorne stood alone in the observation spire, staring at the stars. His advisors begged him to act, to bomb Sol from orbit, to glass the planet, to end the threat before it grew. But Lorne had seen the reports. Ships that fired on empty space had their weapons turn inward. AI that analyzed the phrase too deeply shut down permanently. Even thinking about Earth too long caused headaches, nightmares, a sense of being watched. He realized the terrifying truth. Humanity wasn't hiding. They were waiting, and every act of aggression only made the response stronger. The Concordance had built its empire on force, but Earth had built something else, something that didn't need fleets or flags. It needed only truth. And the galaxy, for the first time, was listening. Mara, now hiding in a smuggler's den on Vexus, played the original transmission one last time. She closed her eyes. She didn't hear fear. She heard sorrow. The sorrow of a people who had offered peace for generations, only to be met with invasion. She understood now. The humans hadn't wanted war. They had wanted respect. But the Concordants had forgotten how to give it. And so, the silence grew louder. Across 1,000 worlds, citizens began to question. Why had they never asked before conquering? Why had they assumed their way was the only way? The phrase became more than a glitch, it became a question. You invaded our home. Whose home had they invaded next? The Empire hadn't just lost control of its machines. It had lost control of its story. And stories, once broken, are hard to repair. The silence from Earth did not mean inaction. It meant something far worse for the Concordance, certainty. While the Empire scrambled to patch its systems and silence its frightened citizens, the effects of that single human sentence deepened like roots in stone. It was no longer just appearing in logs or dreams. It began to change behavior. On the agricultural world of Tarnus IV, A planetary defense commander refused to launch patrol drones near the Sol border. When questioned, he simply said, "We invaded their home. What if they decide we invaded this one too?" He was relieved of duty, but his words spread. Soon, entire security divisions hesitated before scanning unknown vessels. Fear of triggering a response became stronger than loyalty to the Concordance. On Vexus, Leo Carter moved through the Undercity like a shadow. The listeners had grown. Not just humans now, but engineers, medics, even former soldiers who had seen what happened to those who pushed too hard. They shared food, data, and warnings. They didn't plan to overthrow the Concordance. They planned to survive it. Leo spent his days studying old human records, songs, poems, engineering schematics. He found patterns. Human tech wasn't about domination. It was about balance. Their cities recycled air and water. Their power grids healed themselves. Their networks didn't just send data, they listened. That was the key. Earth systems weren't weapons. They were immune responses. Like a body fighting infection, they reacted only when threatened. One evening, a young mechanic named Jace brought Leo a broken comms unit from a Concordance scout ship. It started speaking in its sleep, Jace said, eyes wide. Not words, just humming the phrase in a tone that made my dog hide under the bed. Leo opened the unit. Inside, the circuit board was clean. No malware, no foreign code, but the quantum resonator, the part that handled signal clarity, had been subtly retuned. Not broken, adjusted. As if the original transmission had carried a frequency that realigned any receiver it touched. He realized then that Earth hadn't sent a virus. They'd sent a tuning fork, and the entire galaxy was beginning to vibrate at the same pitch. Mara Hayes, now working with the listeners, helped decode more layers of the message. She discovered that the phrase triggered different reactions based on intent. A curious scientist who played it in a lab saw harmless glitches, text errors, minor resets. But a warship captain who played it while plotting an attack suffered full neural shutdown. The system didn't punish everyone. It punished aggression. This truth terrified the Concordance leadership. How could you fight an enemy that knew your heart before you acted? High Chancellor Lorne, desperate to regain control, authorized Project Iron Veil. The plan was simple: build a fleet with no digital systems. No neural links, no wireless comms, just analog controls, paper logs, and crews trained to ignore all signals. They would approach Sol slowly, observe from a distance, and if needed, deploy kinetic rods. Rocks dropped from orbit, no explosives, no energy signatures. Pure physics. Impossible to hack. The project was secret. But secrets don't stay hidden in a broken empire. Leo heard rumors from a dock worker who'd seen strange ships being built in a sealed hangar on Orithos. No lights, no comms, just thick hulls and manual thrusters. He knew what it meant. They were coming again, and this time they thought they were immune. He tried to warn the listeners, but one of them, a former Concordance medic named Rena, shook her head. They still don't understand. It's not about the tech, it's about the act. Dropping a rock on a home is still invasion, Leo agreed. But what could they do? They had no fleet, no weapons, no voice loud enough to reach Earth. Then a message arrived, not through comms, not through data. It came on a small drone that floated down into the Undercity one night, silent and smooth. It landed at Leo's feet, no markings. Just a screen that lit up with 2 words, "Trust us." Inside was a data crystal. When Mara played it, it showed star maps, fleet movements, and a single instruction: let them come. They need to see. The humans weren't asking for help. They were inviting witness. Leo didn't know who sent it, but he recognized the design, the same smooth lines as the orbital platform from the first encounter. Earth knew they were watching, and they approved. As Project Iron Veil neared completion, unrest grew across the Concordance. On the pleasure moon of Silva, a theater group performed a play about the Sol incident. It ended with the entire cast whispering the phrase in unison. The audience left in silence. Some wept. Others joined protests the next day. On the factory world of Drain, workers shut down production lines, refusing to build weapons for a war we didn't start. The Concordance sent enforcers. But even the enforcers hesitated. One was heard saying, "What if our homes are next?" The Empire was unraveling from the inside, not by force but by conscience. Leo stood on a rooftop in Vexus one night looking up at the stars. He thought of Earth, green fields, quiet oceans, people who chose silence over screams. He wondered if they ever looked up and saw the same sky. He hoped they did. He hoped they knew they weren't alone anymore. Mara joined him, holding a small radio. She had tuned it to a dead frequency, but faintly, beneath the static, a voice hummed. Not words, just a tone. The same tone from the original message. It was everywhere now. In the wind, in the hum of power lines, in the quiet between heartbeats. They're not attacking, she said softly. They're reminding. Leo nodded. And the concordance keeps forgetting. Far away on Orithos, High Chancellor Lorne reviewed the final plans for Iron Veil. He told himself this was necessary. That order must be restored. But as he signed the launch order, his hand shook. For the first time, he wondered if he was the invader. And in that moment of doubt, the phrase echoed in his mind, not as a threat, but as a question. You invaded our home. Whose home was he protecting now? The fleet launched in silence. No fanfare, no broadcasts. Just 30 ships sailing on old physics, carrying old fears, heading toward a truth they could not outrun, and Earth waited not with weapons, but with patience, because some lessons can only be learned the hard way. The galaxy held its breath and the silence grew heavier than any war. The Iron Veil fleet moved through space like ghosts. No comms, no active sensors, just cold metal and human hands on manual controls. They had stripped away everything digital, everything wireless. Even the crew wore no neural implants. Paper maps lined the walls. Orders were written in ink. They believed this made them safe. They believed Earth's power only worked on machines that listened. Captain Elena Ruiz stood on the bridge of the lead ship, steadfast. She was not a warmonger. She had joined the Concordance to protect, not to conquer. But orders were orders. High Chancellor Lorne had called this mission the final clarification. If Earth responded again, they would prove it was a weapon. If not, they would prove it was a myth. Either way, the Empire needed an answer. Elena didn't feel confident. She had read the reports. She had seen the footage of Virex's fleet drifting, helpless. She had heard the whispers from her own crew, how some woke up muttering those 6 words in their sleep. She tried to ignore it. She focused on procedure, on discipline, on the mission. As they neared the edge of the Sol system, she ordered passive scans only. No pings, no signals, just eyes and old telescopes. What they saw confused them. Earth looked peaceful. No warships, no orbital guns, just the same blue planet turning slowly in the sunlight. And the small platform, still there, still silent. Then a voice came through the ship's external speakers. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was a woman's voice, calm and clear, like someone speaking to a child who had stepped too close to a fire. We offered peace for 2 centuries. You chose conquest. Now you choose consequence, Elena froze. They hadn't transmitted anything. Their systems were analog. How had the voice gotten in? Before she could react, the lights on the bridge dimmed. Not from a power loss, from something deeper. The metal walls seemed to hum. The air grew still. Crew members gasped as their watches stopped. Not broke, stopped, as if time itself had paused to listen. Then, the ships began to dissolve. Not explode. Not crack. They simply unraveled. Hull plates turned to fine dust. Wires became threads of light. Engines faded like mist in morning sun. It happened slowly, silently, without heat or sound. The crew felt no pain. They only felt weightless, then calm, then gone. Elena reached for the emergency log, a paper notebook. Her hand passed through it like smoke. She looked at her own fingers. They were fading too. She wanted to scream, but her voice was already part of the silence. In her last moment, she understood. Earth hadn't attacked their machines. They had spoken to the atoms, and the atoms had chosen to obey. The entire Iron Veil fleet vanished within minutes. No debris, no energy spike, just empty space where 30 ships had been. The only thing left was the voice echoing once more across the void before fading into the cosmic background. Back on Orithos, the Concordance waited for a signal. Hours passed, then days. When no word came, High Chancellor Lorne knew. He didn't need confirmation. The silence was the answer. Panic erupted. Governors declared emergency rule. Military factions turned on each other, blaming sabotage, betrayal, divine punishment. Some worlds shut down all technology. fearing the phrase would wake in their walls. Others tried to flee, packing ships with families and treasures, heading for the unknown dark. But there was no escape. The lesson had been delivered. On Vexus, Leo Carter felt it before he heard it. A quiet shift in the air, like the moment after thunder when the world holds still. He looked up at the sky and knew the fleet was gone. Not destroyed, unmade, as if it had never been allowed to exist in Earth's space. Mara stood beside him, holding a radio that played only static. But in that static, she heard something new, a tone of resolution, not warning. Earth had spoken again, and this time the message was final. They didn't hate them, Mara whispered. They just refused to let them stay. Leo nodded. It wasn't punishment. It was protection. Across the galaxy, the phrase, "You invaded our home," stopped spreading. It no longer appeared in logs or dreams. It had done its work. The infection had run its course. Now only memory remained. But memory was enough. On dozens of worlds, citizens gathered in public squares. Not to riot, not to fight, to talk. They asked questions no one had dared ask before. Who gave us the right to take? What if we were the invaders all along? Slowly, quietly, the concordance began to dissolve. Not by war, but by choice. Planets declared independence. Trade alliances formed without central control. Old enemies made peace, united by a shared fear of crossing lines they could not see but now respected. High Chancellor Lorne resigned. He didn't flee. He walked into the public gardens of Arithos and sat beneath a tree, watching children play. He never spoke of Sol again. But sometimes when the wind blew just right, he would close his eyes and whisper an apology no one heard. Back on Earth, life continued. Farmers harvested crops. Students walked to school. Birds flew over cities that had never fired a single shot in anger. In a small house in Colorado, a woman named Nora poured tea for a man named Daniel. Outside, the stars shone as they always had. "They'll remember now," Daniel said. "For a while," Nora replied, "but humans forget. All species do." "Then we'll remind them," he said. "If we must," she smiled. "I hope we won't have to." In the quiet of their home, there was no fear. Only peace. Earned not by strength, but by restraint. Not by shouting, but by speaking once and meaning it forever. And across the galaxy, for the first time in centuries, the stars felt safe again. The galaxy did not heal overnight. Empires do not crumble and rebuild in a single season. But something had changed. It was quiet at first, like the hush after a storm. Then it grew louder. Not with weapons or declarations, but with questions. On 1,000 worlds, people began to ask if they had the right to go where they were not invited. They began to wonder what home really meant. The Galactic Concordance no longer existed. In its place rose a patchwork of free systems, trade pacts, and mutual defense leagues. Some called it chaos. Others called it freedom. But all of them remembered Sol. They remembered the fleet that vanished without fire. They remembered the voice that spoke only once. And they remembered the words, "You invaded our home." No one tried to contact Earth again. Not out of fear alone, but out of respect. Ships that passed near the Sol system gave it wide berth. Some even powered down non-essential systems as a sign of peace. It became custom, then law, then tradition. To approach Earth without permission was not just dangerous, it was shameful. On the moon of Vexus, Leo Carter stood on a newly built observation deck, watching cargo ships dock under open sky. The Undercity was gone, replaced by gardens and schools. The listeners had not become rulers. They had become teachers. They shared what they knew about balance, about listening before acting, about building instead of taking. Mara Hayes now ran a small academy where students from dozens of species studied human history, not as a threat, but as a lesson. She often told them, Earth didn't win because they were stronger. They won because they knew their limits, and they made others see theirs. Far away on the former capital world of Orithos, children played in the ruins of the High Council chamber. Vines grew through cracked floors. Birds nested in broken towers. The place was no longer a seat of power. It was a park. A reminder. Tour guides would point to a single stone marker that read, "Here an empire forgot to ask." No one knew who placed it there. But everyone left flowers. Back on Earth, Daniel walked through a forest in the early morning. Dew clung to the grass. Squirrels chattered in the trees. He stopped by a stream and watched the water ripple over smooth stones. He thought of the stars, of the ships that had come, of the silence that followed. He felt no pride, only relief. They had held the line, not with anger but with clarity. Nora joined him later carrying 2 mugs of tea. They sat on a log and said nothing for a long time. Words were not needed. The peace between them was enough. In cities across the planet, life moved at its own pace. Markets bustled. Artists painted. Scientists studied the sky, not to conquer it but to understand it. Earth had never wanted to rule the galaxy. It only wanted to be left alone. And now it was. Yet Earth was not forgotten. Across the new alliances, a single rule was written into every charter, every treaty, every schoolbook. Never invade without invitation. Some called it the Soul Clause. Others called it the human law. It was not enforced by weapons. It was upheld by memory. On a distant colony world named Haven 9, a young boy asked his teacher, "What are humans like?" The teacher smiled. "They speak rarely. But when they do, the stars listen." The boy frowned. "Are they gods?" "No," she said. "They are guardians. And they taught us that home is not a place you take. It's a place you protect." Even the old enemies of the Concordance changed. The Xanthari, once proud warriors, now sent cultural envoys instead of warships. They brought music, not missiles. They asked before they entered. And when they were told no, they turned back without argument. The galaxy had learned humility. Years passed. New generations grew up who had never known the Concordance. To them, Earth was a myth wrapped in truth, a quiet world that had said one sentence and changed everything. Some tried to prove it was exaggeration. A few reckless explorers edged too close to Seoul, testing the boundary. None returned. But their ships did, not as wrecks but as empty shells drifting gently, systems intact, logs clear except for one line. "We understand now." That was enough. On Earth, Daniel grew older. His hair turned white, his steps slowed, but his eyes remained sharp. He still watched the stars every night, not with suspicion but with quiet hope. He hoped the lesson would last. He knew it might not. But for now it held. Nora passed before him peacefully in her sleep. He buried her under an oak tree they had planted together. He spoke no words at her grave. He didn't need to. The wind carried what he felt. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, a child from the nearby village came to visit him. She brought him bread and asked if the stories were true. About the voice, the vanished fleet, the silent planet that made empires tremble. Daniel looked at her, small and curious, full of the same wonder that had once led others to reach too far. "They're true," he said, "but not because we were strong, because we were clear. We said what we meant, and we meant what we said." The girl nodded as if she understood. Then she asked, "Will you speak again if they come?" He smiled, "Only if we must. But I hope we won't have to." She stayed with him until the stars came out. Then she left, running home under the light of 1,000 worlds that now knew better than to cross a line drawn in silence. And in that silence, the galaxy found a new kind of peace, not built on power but on respect. Not on fear but on memory, Earth remained quiet. Not hidden, not hiding, just waiting as it always had for the universe to remember that some homes are not for taking. And the stars, for the first time in a long time, slept soundly,